Welcome to Check-In with Jason Lauritsen, where we explore how to create human, connected workplaces that employees love and that fuel organizational success. Each week, I invite someone who is leading the way in this work to join me for a conversation to help educate and inspire us. Today's guest is Ben Brooks. Ben is the founder and CEO of Pilot, an award-winning culture and leadership development provider. Pilot has won industry awards for excellence in DEI innovation, coaching and mentoring, women's leadership development, and was a top 25 workplace technology vendor in 2024. Prior to founding Pilot, Ben held several management and HR roles at Lockheed Martin, Oliver Wyman, and Marsh & McLennan companies, where his last role was as a senior vice president of human resources. Ben, thanks for being here.
Jason, glad to be here.
Today, you and I are going to put a new lens on leadership development, and I love this topic, and I'm excited to dig into that. But before we do that, I would love to take a little time to get to know you and your work a little bit. So my first question is just to invite you to share a little bit more about Pilot and the work that you do.
Yeah, I love talking about Pilot. I put my life savings into founding the company about 11 years ago. I'm the sole founder and funder. We're proud to be certified, LGBT-owned and disability-owned business. And our focus is and overall vision is for people to feel powerful at work. And anyone that's worked in HR or business generally knows that the core of business and performance problems are always people problems. And so our view is we think leadership can be fostered at any level, and we'll get into more details around that. But our focus is helping organizations really define the culture that they want to have that drives their strategy, and then develop leaders at all levels with the capabilities to lead in the culture that's needed to drive the strategy. And so we work with companies all around the world, and we have a flagship emerging leader development program where we reach people that typically never even get leadership development. But our real focus is making sure that we tailor programs to the unique culture and business model of our customers and really enroll a much bigger group of people on a percentage basis in an organization in the idea of being and acting and thinking like leaders, and leaders in the particular expression of leadership that's unique to that organization, their geography, their industry, their values, their culture, and their business model.
Mm. And I love how you think about leadership. It's, I think, much more broad than most people, and we're going to dig into that in a minute. But I would love to hear a little bit about the origin story, I guess, in terms of how did you come to decide to invest in doing this? What was it that you saw or experienced in your roles that led you to go on this journey?
You know, I thought about this in advance of our conversation, and I'd probably even trace it back to being a Boy Scout. I grew up in Colorado. We share a love of skiing, you and I. And I, was involved in scouting. We talked about leadership since I was 10 or 11 years old. And I became an Eagle Scout. And that was a really great experience of doing the projects and the reviews. But there was a lot of discussion around, how do you motivate? How do you inspire? How do you manage your own conduct? And so that was inspiring. And I went on in college. I was a part of a leadership program. I got a minor in leadership studies, and we had all these service learning projects. And I went over to the, northern India to where the Dalai Lama lives, and did service learning and did things in different countries, and just learned a lot about leadership in all these different contexts. Our lead program lead was Air Force Academy grad and a professor of psychology and leadership. And so from a pretty early formative age, I always was sort of into it, if you will, around leadership. It didn't really connect with me, though, until I wound up in HR after being in management consulting and engineering, that, this is the access point to actually affect or develop leaders. And so in doing so, I just saw, most organizations, there's a real scarce and limited view of what leadership is. It's typically related to a title or level, and yet a lot of people in those seats are absolutely not leaders. People that don't supervise somehow can't be leaders, and people that are early in their career. So one, there was a paradigm of leadership was this really anointed and scarce thing, which irritated me because I think it's incorrect and unhelpful. And additionally, to be a leader was made too complex. I saw leadership models that had 34 different leadership capabilities or tenets or traits. I don't know how I get good at 34 of anything. And I'd say things that were just overly complicated or too generic, or people would look and they'd say, oh, I love college basketball. So, Coach K from Duke, he's a great coach. And I agree. But, they say the Coach K model of leadership, we got to use this, or we got to use this person. So we got to follow, Marcus Buckingham. And those are all great people and inspiring people, but they're talking about leadership in a particular way, in a particular context. And people didn't slow down to say, what does leadership mean to me? There's not just one definition. And you see and it's probably the most bastardized term besides engagement in the sort of HR hierarchy in terms of people attaching everything to it. So, I wanted to make it more accessible. I wanted to make it more about behavior. I wanted to make it more simple and also more relevant and localized to organizations. And when the corporate world, I buy millions of dollars worth of this stuff, it was clunky as hell. People didn't want to do it. We didn't have any good data. It didn't seem relevant or local. It wasn't inspiring. And so I just knew that we could do better.
So when you think about what you do now, I'm just curious. I'm always curious kind of what lights people up or sort of where they find their joy in their work. But what is it about this work that you get to do that you would say you love the most? What is the thing that really lights you up?
I think if I think kind of a what, why, and how framework, and I think on the what in particular is, reaching people that never consider themselves that they could be leaders or that they were ready to be leaders, and having them realize that they already are, and having them stand taller in their shoes, being more powerful at work, and immediately changing their behaviors just because of how they occur to themselves. That is incredible. I think the why in particular that motivates me is I'm having people become, with our company and our 50 plus employees around the world, large and in charge, not just at work, in their community organizations and their faith organizations and their children's schools and in their relationships with their families. Because, when people become powerful at work, they become powerful in other areas of their life. And I think on the how, having people realize that they don't need to get an MBA, or they don't need to become a vice president, or they don't need to do all these things, that there's an incremental consistency to being, potentially lifelong learners, and that they can start right away. And so those things really jazz me. And in particular, just, making it accessible, but also inspiring, because it doesn't. I think we have a lot of people in the leadership space that got PhDs and they're very clinical and technical, but they squeeze all the life and the heart and the humanity out of it.
Well, this sets up, I think, a very nice transition into kind of really getting into the work and how you think about some of this and how you show up to the work that you do. And one of the I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things I find really inspiring about your work is just how broadly you think about leadership and what a leader is. And so I would love you to just talk a little bit about how you define what leadership means. What does it mean to be a leader? Because I think that's such an interesting place to start.
Yeah, I think the anchor or the default for folks is you hear the idea of like our leaders or a leadership position or they're a leadership level. This is a very common language inside of an organization. I think a lot of that is BS, because just because someone is a C-suite person doesn't mean they are a leader. We've all seen an executive who is in a leadership position, and just because they're in that seat, they're absolutely not a leader and they don't show up like a leader. We've also seen people who can be a receptionist or a team lead or a salesperson or someone on a support desk that totally is a leader. So I think decoupling it from, rank or hierarchy or title is very important. To say that doesn't necessarily make you a leader. It gives you legitimate power or authority for sure, but that doesn't necessarily make you a leader. Leadership really being, your behaviors and your beliefs and your mindset being aligned against particular standards or principles of what someone individually defines or describes as leadership. That's the part that I think really trips people up, because so many people in this space are like, well, I've got a leadership model and it's got to be this way, or our research says this, or these are our competencies. And that's fine, but it's contextual. What it takes to be a leader, working in a coal mine in South Africa is going to be different than working at a agriculture startup in Nebraska. And so it's important to also make sure that people understand what does leadership look like in a particular context. So really, I believe anyone can be a leader. They don't have to be a people supervisor. That's called being a manager. right? Being a manager is very important, but we often collapse management and leadership when we think, well, if you're a senior manager, you're like a super manager, therefore you're a leader. If you've got manager, you're automatically a leader. It's like, no, you just have hierarchy. You just have stacks. You just have rings of the tree, concentric circles. That really looking at it is management is underrated and super important around, creating a good environment, having the right talent, setting clear direction, allocating resources, solving problems, holding people accountable, recognizing them. That core managerial toolkit is absolutely important, but it is distinct from leadership. That's being a great manager or supervisor. Leadership is a broader sense that might involve courage or curiosity, ethics. It might involve, strategic thinking. It might involve, being really inspiring or motivating, a variety of things. But often in leadership, you think about kind of the head, heart, guts, and results. How do you tap the logic of someone? How do you tap the emotion of someone? How do you stay grounded or make tough choices? And how do you make sure that produces something relative to what the context wants? And if that's at Duke basketball, that's to win games. If that's at a startup, it might be to show traction on a product or revenue growth or fundraising. So that's really, I think, is a broader set of principles, tenets, capabilities that are distinct from people supervision. And they're also distinct from the technical elements of doing a job. If you're an investment banker or you're an attorney or you're a nurse, there are technical things. You might even need to be licensed. You might need a certain degree. That's all great. Those are important technical capabilities, but leadership is distinct from the technical nature of what it takes to be, let's say, a good, ICU nurse.
So, I'm curious, as I'm listening to this, it's interesting because it can feel, even in the description, even when you lay it out like that, I think where it gets really tricky is to separate out like things like management responsibilities, right? The management role that we have, which is all about other people, from leadership. And sometimes they do feel intertwined. So when you talk about leadership, I'm curious, we talked a lot about what it is or sort of the degree of sort of how you do your job, but I'm assuming if we're defining leadership is about the impact or the outcome, is it about it, like, I'm trying to parse out, like, is it about impact on other people? Is it about impact on when you separate out, like, if I'm going to cultivate my ability as a leader, what is the difference between, let's say I'm in a technical role, someone who is not a leader or maybe isn't leading versus someone who is? We're in the same role. What am I going to notice about the difference between those two people? What do I see or experience in someone who's more cultivated or activated as a leader versus the other?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, obviously it's going to be contextual. So what kind of technical role or what the context or the, performance in general is contextual. You can imagine, leading a fitness class in the Arctic Circle versus on the beach, still a fitness class, but the context of the weather or where you are is important. But in that regard, if you compare this sort of, person A and person B there, the person that's going to be a leader is going to be thinking about more than themselves. They're going to be kind of thinking about the collective whole. They're going to be thinking about how their behavior is aligned with their own values or the organization's priorities. So a sense of self-leadership and self-grounding, they're going to come at it with more than just the technical skills. So they're not going to be necessarily a better technician than the other person. They actually may have subpar technical skills, but the composite of all of what they can do. If you think of a great chef, it's like, sure, can this person roll sushi better than anyone else? Maybe, but can they do all the other? Let's talk about desserts. Let's talk about drinks. Let's talk about everything else. And so it's not just around kind of that deep, sort of on a T-shaped leader. You've got the vertical part of the T, which is often your technical or domain expertise. You're a CFO, finance. You're a CIO, technology, right? You're a chief marketing officer, marketing. But it's the horizontal of part of the T and the top of that T. Can I bring all these things together? Do I understand the interconnected parts? Can I respect others? Can I see the bigger picture, the strategy of it? Whereas I could be a really smart technician, but I don't really know how we make money. Or I don't know how I'm communicating and if that's disempowering others. Or I don't know what the challenges are, or I don't know the tough prioritization we have to do where someone's going to probably have to feel like they lost and someone have to feel like they won. That would be more the leader mindset. And I think on the manager side, you said they're intertwined. I agree. Management, again, is underrated. Most people don't have good managers. There's a million studies and stats out there around the missing link is middle management. That's been the case for 40 or 50 years. I often just summarize the definition of management simply as the achievement of results through others. Right? Management is fundamentally through hierarchy about leverage, right? This is why typically you don't want a manager with one direct report. You want from a spans and layers. You've got that manager who's standardizing, overseeing. So that is like a real productivity, throughput, outcome orientation, which is critical and fundamental, but it doesn't necessarily address the climate, the vibe, the ethics, the how. It's more sort of that sort of performance or outcome or operations orientation, and you need both.
Yeah. Yeah. It is such an interesting, it's such an interesting thing to understand, I think, when you're doing development and understanding the skills. And I hear, like, kind of what I'm hearing is leadership it's kind of an amplifier of performance in some ways.
Yes.
And it is also kind of an expander, if you will, or it's sort of like you're going to have a broader impact than just what your box suggests you are there to do, right? So there's amplification, there's expansion. It's sort of like it helps you contribute more broadly, both organizationally, but probably on other people as well. So that's and that seems like that's the business case, right? That's why we would want to invest in it.
And I think leadership also allows organizations to navigate things that are not completely predictable or controllable. There's certain things, right? You can lock down a customer service terminal so a person at the airport can't give away free bags. You can lock down the Macy's counter so no one can give a friend a discount. You can do these things, but when you think about navigating a tough situation, like it was next week it'll be 5 years, half decade since the start of the pandemic and stay-at-home orders. There wasn't a playbook for that. Right? How did you handle those things? Should you furlough people? Should you do part-time? Like, do you keep benefits? How do you keep people safe? Do you have a vaccine mandate or not? All these things, there weren't right answers for any of this. And that's where you saw people really gravitate towards, whether it's in business or politics or otherwise, people who are leading, who are giving a sense of direction or even hope or inspiration or safety. And so you often find in sort of what I call peak and trough moments is when you really need and notice leadership even more, is when things are going extraordinarily well. You have the IPO and then someone says, okay, everyone's going to be a millionaire at this company. We're giving away a bunch of it or something and doing something really generous, or we're moving to a 4-day work week and we're going to figure out the model for that because that's good for society, or we're offering childcare at the office because we're doing really well, whatever those things are. And I'm not saying it has to be a perk or wealth, but those are just examples. It's also at the trough moment, like a pandemic or like a big layoff. You see a lot of it. We've heard a lot of these horror stories around, mass firings over Zoom or people's badges not working when they come to the office, and a bunch of just frankly dumb shit out there, that is just people are doing that. It's like completely thoughtless. It's heartless. It's bad for reputation. It's not even best practices. It introduces legal liability, resentment. I mean, just there's not a lot of thinking, but they're saying on an efficiency basis, if we get 1,000 people on a Zoom call and just be like, you're all fired, and then just hang up and disconnect their computers, wow, that would be efficient. And you know what? If you were only looking at the fastest way to notify people, that's true. But the leader would look at the bigger picture and say, if you optimize just around that, that's fine. But think about the reputational damage. Think about the news articles. Think about the legal lawsuits. Think about the humanity and the heartlessness. Why are we doing this on a Monday morning? If you let people go, you generally want to do it on a Thursday or a Friday, so they have the weekend to go do their normal thing and not stew about losing their job all week.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Let's change gears then. This is sort of, we've set the foundation for why this is so important. And I'm curious, leadership development is certainly not a new thing, right? There's been investment in leadership development for decades and decades.
Yep.
But I think also most of the data suggests that we're not globally particularly good at it. We're not super effective at it. And so what do you see if you were to highlight, what are the 2 or 3 biggest mistakes that you think organizations are making that get in the way of them realizing the impact of their leadership development investments?
Well, if you think about the outcome of development, right, was you would essentially have leadership. It'd be present. You have a bench of people, they're showing up as leaders, et cetera. And, boards of public and private companies typically have leadership and succession is one of their top 1 or 2 risks or concerns across all industries. Mm-hmm. So this is a major, major issue. And from the highest levels, the amount of money that's invested in leadership development is tremendous, but the satisfaction and efficacy is often single digits percentage in terms of people and organizations saying they're effective or that they work. And there's just endless data from McKinsey and from Gallup and from all these different firms out there that are just showing that this is broken. I think a lot of the reason it's broken, one, it involves way too few people. You look at, we work with an organization and they're 40,000 people and their leadership development program has 100 seats a year.
Right.
You think about that you got better chances to get into Harvard or to find Taylor Swift tickets laying on the floor than you do of being in a leadership development program at this storied, well-regarded company. So things are subscale. They're precious. They're way too expensive. They take people out. They fly them to some other country and they do this challenge trip and very sort of 1980s, 1990s ways of doing it, which were amazing and beautiful. But they are just they're theoretical. It's more like getting an MBA. It's not applied. It's not unique to the context. Also, you've got the blind leading the blind. If you've got weak leadership in executive roles, kind of the McKinsey law crappy people, A players hire A players and B players hire C players. So if you got people who are not leaders, they're going to hire people who largely are also not leaders, and that duplicates out.
Sure.
Right. They don't want, average people don't want someone better underneath them.
Sure.
Right. They want someone lesser underneath so they can control them. Great people want to be a net talent exporter and have people that can take over their job. Smart people know if you have a successor in your team, then you're promotion ready. Right. And so I think there's just a different orientation around power and control in all of this. And, there's a little bit of on average, organizations and talent management organizations, if you're to think about assessment versus development, assessment being talent reviews, 360 feedbacks, performance reviews, other third-party assessments. And then there's the development part, like growing them through a program, through coaching, through mentorship, apprenticeship, executive education, stretch assignments. 90% of the effort and the attention is on assessment. 10% is on development. Right. So imagine you're building a house and you measured everything 9 times and you only swung the hammer 1 time or moved the saw. There's just not a lot happening development wise because we're farting around being like, oh, is she in the 7 box or the 8 box? Yeah. Either way, she's in a good box and that's a leader you want to develop. So there's a thing called implied precision bias. So we're sort of milking mice on these tiny little things. Or is Jason, is he at an exceeds or a role model level around this thing? Well, I don't know. Either way, he's above the average, right? And he's valued and we'd fight to keep him. That's about all we need to know. Let's move him in development. But instead we get overly precise, in part because development we have in such clunky, expensive, non-measurable ways that's low efficacy. Whereas I think part of it is like lowering the assessment theater and complexity, which doesn't add any value, and making it more practical and applied and clear. You still want to have data and you want to be thoughtful and you want to segment and you want to be equitable, et cetera, but then really move that into action. The thing is, it's easy to assess. It's easy to throw someone through a thing, an assessment, a psychometric or whatever, a talent review. And it feels sort of like, when kids get a Fisher-Price house and they play house and they're like, oh, you're having tea. I'm going to put something in the oven. That's a little bit like, or the executive teams in HR is like sort of talent theater. And there's a lot of like, oh, we're doing a review. And, and it feels like you're doing something and it is work, but it doesn't actually develop anyone. It doesn't make them more capable. You just have more data in their file about them. You have more evidence or you have more viewpoints. And that the thing is, it's just hard to develop and people have not invested the time and methods. And that's where I was so committed to create Pilot is like, hey, you probably have your list of hypos already. You probably have your succession list already. Most organizations that are midsize or above do. They're just not developing them. So let's figure out how to actually do that and do that fast, structured, time efficient, measurable. Let's involve their managers. Let's involve their colleagues. Let's have it be applied. Let's have them personalize it to their needs. Whereas I think a lot of it just becomes very academic, or it falls into the 70-20-10 adult learning model where 10% of brain development is formal learning, classrooms, textbooks, e-learning, certifications. We put a lot of the development in that 10% bucket rather than the 70% informal, social on the job or the 20% coaching, apprenticeship, mentorship.
Yep. Well, and I think, one of the things you've also talked about that I think is the way I love how you've kind of Like these are what sort of traditionally have been the obstacles. And then you have mentioned earlier that the goal is, or at least part of what you're pushing at, is getting casting a broader net, right? Making it easier to get development to more people, and doing it in a way that feels more, that's more clear, that is more sort of oriented to the organization, like making sure that the leadership we're developing them in actually makes sense for the organizational context and the strategy and all of that as well. And I think that's a really important and often overlooked piece as well. And so I'd love for you to talk us through like what this looks like. Like I know you have a bunch of clients where you do this. So I asked you if you would share a case study example of how you have helped an organization kind of do this work to help people listening to this think about, okay, what are the pieces of this that need to be done? What does the work actually look like? Because so much of leadership development, we're usually talking, to your point, about conceptual stuff, and we forget to actually talk about, okay, what is it? What is the work? If we're going to roll up our sleeves and do it, what does the work look like? So could you kind of quickly take us through your case study, walk us through a little bit of what the problem was and kind of what you were trying to address, and then just what were the key steps of that so that we can kind of show people what that looks like?
Yeah, and as we dive into that, I'll mention one other thing on a lot of people still care about diversity, equity, and inclusion because in particular, they're smart and they realize that the skilled labor market will be constrained for the next 30 or 40 years.
Right.
And that product growth markets for consumer products in particular will be targeted to multicultural and minority majority demographics. So from the perspective of if you want to make money in the future, not a moralistic argument, which is a separate thing, you're going to want to make sure you also don't have bias and think, oh, they're not a leader because they're introverted, or they're not a leader because their English is their second language, or they're not a leader because they're from the HR function, or they're not a leader because of, they come from this demographic or this culture or this faith, even if it's subconscious bias. And so part of this is also making sure that, organizations often of their high potentials, they only know 50% of them. They think that they know them. There's a bunch of sleeper talent all over. Nikki Odom, the head of DEI at Nestle North America, one of our customers talks about hypos or high potentials on the bubble. These people that are essentially parched. It's like if you get a house plant that looks kind of sad and droopy, and all of a sudden you water it, fertilize it, give it some sun, all of a sudden it's going gangbusters. That's a lot of your sleeper talent. And instead you're focusing on people that don't want it at the top, or people that probably shouldn't be in role, or a really subset of groups. So if you think to the case study example, one of our customers is a company called Versant Health. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of MetLife, and they provide vision benefits. And they're the largest provider of eyewear and vision benefits to Medicare patients and Medicaid. They provide over 40 million Americans with glasses or contacts or other vision solutions. So, $1 billion plus company, 1,000 plus employees, and their primary strategy, and part of the reason MetLife bought them, this is public information, it was to grow, right? That they basically had this platform and they wanted to distribute it through MetLife and sell. Well, if you want to grow, they have a great product, they have great benefits, great capability, but they needed to grow their people so they could grow their revenue and their reach, so they could help more people elevate their quality of life by being able to see and experience the world to the best of their abilities. So it started with, well, if we need more leaders, there was this complaint around, we just need more leaders, we need more leadership. Well, what is leadership here? What does it mean at Versant Health in a vision benefits and vision plan company? I was like, well, it's this and this is, you ask 10 people, 10 totally different definitions. So who Jason thinks is a leader, or what Jason's going to hire for, or what Jason's going to reward, or how Jason's going to develop or give feedback compared to Ben, all well intended. We both could be wildly and violently in support of leadership, but we're coming from different angles that is based on our past, our preferences, et cetera. So the first thing was to define what good looks like for leadership. And that was leadership not for people that were executives, but anyone at any level. We needed to create leadership principles that could apply to an individual contributor in the field, at a home office, in a contact center, all the way up to their head of sales or their head of manufacturing or their head of partnerships. And so it started with creating what we call the Versant Health Way, which was combining a refreshed vision, mission, and values, leadership tenets, manager competencies and standards, and values into one beautiful document that everyone could go to and say, this is what's expected and how we're going to work together. So getting a shared yardstick of what leadership is critical. If you have one, great. Most organizations don't, or the one that they do, people don't particularly like or buy into because it feels like something ChatGPT made for you that's very generic. Like they communicate and they do this. And it's like, is that, like we work with a public health organization. The CEO's been arrested 300 times for civil disobedience. They have the largest supply of HIV supportive housing in the world. They're going to have a very unique expression of what leadership looks like versus the vision care company. And that's okay. Like they're not wrong, either of them. It's just leadership in their context. So the first thing is define what good looks like. Then it's around starting at the top, the executives understanding how they're doing both individually and collectively, right? In those leadership competencies. And so we actually give each other peer feedback. We have people say, hey, Jason, of our 6 leadership tenets, I think you're really strong at this one. I think this is your biggest area of growth. And we do it in a very, structured way. And we start to have people take on both a torchbearer principle, a thing that they're going to bring into the room. And if you're the curiosity guy, and that's one of the leadership traits, you're going to bring creativity because you're so good at it. You're going to be the one, almost like the UN representative with the nameplate in front of you that says like curiosity leadership. And you're going to bring that, right? Because we think leadership is very individual, solo sport, but it's really a team sport. Mm-hmm. And if you want this leadership components present, doesn't mean they need to be present in every person, but collectively within the team and the organization. Also then having the growth areas to say out loud, I'm not perfect. This isn't a litmus test for morality or having a job here. I need to work on being deliberate. I take action and ask questions later. It's like, no. I need to slow down and be more thoughtful and to be open, sort of come out and be fallible and vulnerable is a key thing. And then distinctly, how does that team collectively? So that's the individual part, the me and I, and then the we. How does that team want to make commitments and say, we as the executive team, if we're being curious, it will look like this. If we're the executive team being deliberate, it'll look like this. And so then those are commitments they make together, and we have them broadcast that to the company to hold the company, have the company hold them accountable, right? So they put themselves out on the limb and say, here's what we're going to do. And then as we work down through the organization, and again, we can work up, down, across. Most organizations want to go in a sort of hierarchical manner. I wish that wasn't the case, but we have to meet people where they are. And so then we work with their senior managers and their managers to talk about getting them feedback, right? Having them have a simplified development plan, having them see themselves as leaders, because you'll often have people that are, vice president, and they say, well, I'm not a leader. I'm not at the C-suite table. And you think there's only 10 people at a 1,000-person company, they're leaders. Like that's tomfoolery, malarkey, as someone once said, right? So we're going to, really expand and invite them to consider themselves as leaders, but also have them be self and situationally and socially aware of where they need to grow and where they're strong. And a lot of leadership development and feedback is only about the gaps, the negativity, the deltas, the things that aren't good. We want to make sure people are probably in those roles already for a reason. They probably come with a lot of greatness. They could come from prior work experience, life experience, other things, their faith, etc. So we want to really tap into that and we really activate them. But then we get them enrolled in the idea of developing people at scale for their self-interest, not for charity for the company, but we really have them tap into how it helps with their career, their well-being, their work-life balance, their satisfaction, working on things that they like. And then we start to work with emerging leaders and we put them through a 6-month development program rooted in those same leadership. So it's the same language. It's going to be a different expression. Being deliberate as the CFO might be being very precise around capital allocation, right? Being deliberate around being a customer service manager might be thinking about how you route cases to different agents based upon the complexity or their need to grow. But it's still being deliberate. It's just in a different role.
Sure.
So we're using shared language. We don't create 90 different versions of competency. We don't have 19 different leadership things. It's consistent. And then the broader organization is invited to say everyone at Versant Health can be a leader. And so we do programming to bring people through immersion sessions. We just essentially enroll and invite them. And it's not being voluntold, right? It's not this forced compliance. It's to say this is an invitation, an opportunity. And if you want to be just incrementally better, we love that. That's progress. And this isn't about keeping your job or not. And so we really invite and enroll people to get, expand their locus of control, to unlearn their learned helplessness, to feel the permission or the safety to speak up, to be empowered, et cetera. And so we work on that kind of the whole organization. So then what it results in is you've got people that are all speaking the same language. They have a shared understanding. They realize that people can lead from any level. They localize it to their role. They get feedback, so they're more self-aware around how they can grow. They make a choice around a single development objective. They localize the standards to their role or context, because it's going to look different for someone who's a nurse versus the claims administrator at a hospital. They're both at a hospital. It's going to look different, right? And so we do that, and you essentially enroll the entire culture in, this is the way we're going to work together, but also in the context of maybe their values or other power skills, et cetera. So there's a lot to do, but these are typically very disparate things. You need to kind of create the Atlanta, right? The hub. You need to put all of it together in one place that has spokes to others. So people can say, this, I need to simplify it. It needs to be crisp language. It needs to be mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. This is why it's a lot of work, but this is why you hire outside providers to help you, not to tell you, but to help you. If an outside provider is telling you what it's supposed to be, they're probably not the right person for you. If they're helping you and being on the journey and synthesizing and getting people to prioritize and understanding agreement versus alignment, that's a great partner to work with. And so you can see in this Versus Health case study that it's leadership at all levels, from a standard understanding of leadership defined to their unique business and context, and an invitation for anyone to show up in this way, and an acknowledgement that it's going to look different in each role or context or location, and that all of that is okay. And also distinguishing that someone being a great supervisor is fantastic, but that is distinct from being a great leader, and we want the 1-2 punch of both.
Right. That's well, thank you for sharing all that. I think that's a really nice it's a really nice sort of clear map to kind of help people understand what the work looks like. And there's a couple of things that jump out at me, like so much of this, I think you and I talked a little bit about this when we were pre-gaming this conversation, that so much of the work I know that I get brought in to do, and the work that you're doing here, is about clarity. It's about helping people get really clear about what matters for them and how to implement it and what it looks like, because clarity is kind of rocket fuel for this kind of work. And so without it, it's really impossible. And the other thing is that it is, and you can do this work internally. I mean, there are people that do. They do it on their own. They do it internally. They have it. But it is difficult work. It is difficult work in the sense of, it's a slow down to go fast kind of thing. And so just acknowledging that, that's why I think organizations like Pilot are so valuable to have out there, is that you can do it, but boy, it is super helpful to have someone who can ask the right questions and knows how to drive towards clarity and all of that to accelerate you in this work, because otherwise it's just hard work to do. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like we could probably spend another 2 hours pulling apart this case study, but sadly, we don't have that much time today. So we're gonna accelerate here to the finish, and then we're gonna tell people how to find you and find more information about what you do. So if they are curious, they can go dig in deeper. So
can I make one very quick point, Jason?
Yeah, go for it.
Concise. On the clarity and the partnership, those are such great points that you pulled out there. So I don't want to miss that, because you just really anchored for everyone such important elements. So the clarity, I think, is in two parts. It's in the sort of simplicity and the prioritization, which is hard to do, because when you prioritize, it's like clipping things off of a congressional spending bill. Like, there's things you gotta do that. And then the clarity is also in the language, right? Yeah. Having it be clear, having a common understanding, not just having it be one word that means 1,000 things. And then on the partnership, absolutely people can do this work on their own, but often with an outside partner, it winds up not being the last thing on the agenda at the executive team that we run out of time for and we punt it. We can challenge the CEO, Meredith, Ryan Reed, who's the CEO of Versant Health. I can say, hey, Meredith, I think this is getting a bit wordy, and I know you want to do these things, but the best practice is here. Or I can say, hey, Jen Wyatt, the head of marketing and comms, or, Jen Kishel, the COO, or Kia Lindsay, the CHRO. We have relationships with the entire C-suite. We say, hey, I know you're trying to do this, we're trying to do this. So we can help the stakeholder management, but we can also drive it to resolution, because the same company I mentioned earlier that had the 100 people in their leadership program has been working on defining the clarity of what leadership is for over 2 years. And they got a bunch of smart people, got PhDs, got all these things. Yep. They never got it approved, such that they had succession and turnover, and the head of HR was let go, who was working on it for over 2 years, and now they're starting over. Yep. We do it in a tight 100 days. Other partners can too. And so getting to something
Yeah.
again, gets you out of the theater of all of this. So, and
Yeah.
then, so I think that partnership is so key.
Agreed. And it's just helpful. Like I said, one of those things, not that you can't do it, but this is one of those areas where the acceleration of having the right people to help you, because you have to get through the clarity work in order to unlock the impact of all the rest of it. And it's the impact that you're after. And so the accelerating that clarity work with a little help is really, I think, really smart. So appreciate you sharing all that. That's amazing. Couple questions for you as we wrap up, as we land the plane here.
Right.
What is a challenge or obstacle that you're wrestling with right now in your work?
There's about 30, so I'll pick one or two. I think one is getting HR executives comfortable with better, faster, simpler ways of doing multi-rater or 360 feedback and development planning. We're trying to make that faster, more structured, less biased, better measurement, and also having a single development objective. We were a big believer is you should have one development goal at a time, only one. Only one. And everyone's like, no. Our UKJ was programmed to have 3 of them in there. I'm like, I don't care what Workday says or what you could do. One, right? So that's a challenge. It's just the paradigm of setting new standards that it should be clearer, simpler, faster, and more prioritized. I think the other one is to help HR understand that they want to make this the business's definition of leadership. I think this is fun work. Investigations are not fun. Layoffs and furloughs are not fun. Compliance and workers' comp and benefits renewal and claims issues and leave management, that's not fun. Now, it's important, it's critical, and it's really important to get right. But the culture and the leadership work often is really fun. And so sometimes I think that we find that folks want to sort of hoard this, say, well, this is my baby, this is my fun thing. And when it becomes that, it becomes the HR person or the HR department's leadership model, it becomes the HR department's project. And that's where really kind of giving up the ownership in a certain way, because you want the buy-in on the change management. So it's the organization, so the business or the organization says, no, damn it, this is how we're going to achieve our strategy and our mission, our KPIs or OKRs or our rocks or whatever our model is. So I think those things of just changing the paradigms and being open to different ways of doing it, and also sort of sharing and releasing this thing without abdicating responsibility as professionals who have a lot of credibility in these spaces, but really, being sort of the architect, but not necessarily the general contractor of these things. Right. So that way it can get deployed and owned rather than micromanaged by HRBPs or something else. It's like, no, you want the business running. You want to let them run free. You want to let them try different stuff, because that means they're actually owning it and they care.
I love that. I mean, architect is kind of a perfect analogy or metaphor for that, right? Because you don't hire the architect and then the architect goes and designs a building that they think is the best building. You hire an architect who helps understand what do you need and want, and then they bring that into they help you create that into reality. So that's a perfect analogy. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think those resonate in terms of challenges I hear and feel as well. So last question for you. And this is I ask everybody this question. It's a hopeful kind of view into the future. When you think about work broadly in 5 years, this isn't a prediction. It's sort of, what do you hope will be different about work in 5 years than it is today?
I hope it's going to be a lot easier for people to do good work. Asana did a study, the project management company, software company, we use them. We're big fans of their product. 60% plus of a knowledge worker's time is spent doing work about work. Administration, updates, etc. The amount of productivity that we have, I'm talking in a US-centric perspective, even right now, we do global work, but just even within the United States, is unbelievable. The talent, the people, the technology, our culture, our entrepreneurial spirit. And so I think that if we can get out of the way and sort of unleash people, and not to say that they're unaligned or without controls or oversight or anything like that. I'm not suggesting anarchy or holacracy or anything like that. But my hope is that the pressures of global competition, of some of these political things going on, might actually force organizations to really rethink how they run and how they operate, because things are moving faster than ever in pretty much every industry. Volatility is greater in some ways than ever in many industries. And so organizations are going to need to change to survive. And I think we can make that change a win-win that also leans into getting the best out of people so they can do good work. Because oftentimes you talk to someone, hey, honey, how was work today? I had a great day. Isn't usually I did nothing, right? I had a great day is I solved the problem. I got something approved. I did something differently. I handled something differently. I made a difference. Whatever. Generally high performers, which I think most people want to be, or at least average, they want to do good work, right? And I think, even Ronald Reagan said, the most noble social program in the world is meaningful work. I think part of meaningful work isn't just being employed, right? But it's being employed and deployed and empowered to do good work. And so many times organizations are the restraining force to their own people. They're getting they're literally becoming an obstacle to their own people, solving customer problems, making better products, being more empathetic with partners, being more efficient, dealing better with supply chains. And so that's my hope for work, is that we really help people do good work. And I think the external competitive pressures, it won't be a logic argument of, oh, this would be a good thing to do. It'll be, we have to, right? But I think as a result of that, that will spur a lot of innovation in how we get work done, and ideally change how people answer that question at the dinner table at night. How was work today, honey?
Sure. There's an enormous amount of potential there. And it feels like it connects back to that first challenge you shared, and that in order to realize that hopeful future, it is really about breaking free of so many paradigms that we're boxed in by, right? And how we think work has to happen, or how we think work needs to be done. We're going to have to shed a lot of paradigms and rethink a lot of things to get there. So, but I that's a great vision, and I think a great call to action, actually, that we can make that happen if we start to rethink and let go a little bit of some of that control, right? To allow people to find their
control's
path.
an illusion anyway. And the shedding, we're finding actually, about one last point is that we're finding with customers, they sometimes say, hey, we can't even start this work until we get the paradigms to shift, which is smart. It's good change management. So they say, hey, can you come in and inspire us, give a talk, do a workshop?
Sure.
Don't actually do the work. Talk about the potential of doing the work. And so that's a bit of a stool softener sometimes for the executive teams. So that when we say, hey, let's go actually commit to doing this, they're excited about the possibility. But so much of the change management is addressing the intangibles, the things under the iceberg, the feelings, the concerns, the overwhelm. And when we do that, then you can really go slow to go fast, and you can sail. But the changing the paradigms isn't always jamming new methods at people. It's often enrolling them in a discussion around how we could solve their problems better and how we could help achieve their outcomes, and what they'd be willing to trade off in terms of their comfort or what they're used to.
Love it. Love it. Well, as we close, I like to ask, do a quick check out. And so, Ben, in one word, what best describes how you feel or are feeling as we wrap up our conversation?
Inspired.
For me, the word, I don't know if this captures how I'm feeling, but it's a word I'm going to be thinking about, is bubble. Because I love this. I love this framing of understanding or thinking about the work of DEI, right, in the world that we live in right now, is understanding that this is about unleashing and sort of equipping and maximizing this amazing amount of talent that you have or have access to that you just don't see, or that you aren't giving the opportunity, right? They're getting missed by our systems. And so I love that. Talent on the bubble, folks. Go find your talent on the bubble and feed and water them. Give them some fertilizer and let them grow. So that's amazing. Ben, I love this.
Jason, on that, I just challenge people, that talent on the bubble that you're listening to today might be you.
Yeah.
You may be the person you need to feed and fertilize, not others. I think HR people are often so other-oriented. Don't leave yourself out of being the talent on the bubble. Blossom where you're planted, right? If your grass is brown, don't look for greener grass, water your own damn grass, and take care of you. Because if you lead by example and you take care of yourself, you will have more influence with others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Perfect call to action as we leave. Ben, this was a great conversation. Like I said, I feel like we could have really dug in and kept going for a long time, but we need to get rolling. So I appreciate it. Awesome conversation. Can you tell people how, if they want to connect with you or learn more about Pilot, how would they do that? Where would they go?
Great. Our website is www.pilot.coach, C-O-A-C-H, pilot.coach. I'm on LinkedIn and very findable, Ben Brooks. And that's a great way to connect with me there. And I share a lot of content and resources there. If you're Instagram or Threads or Twitter, I'm Ben Brooks, NY is in New York. They're available as well. And then my email address is ben@pilot.coach. So if we can be a resource, if you're looking for some articles or some stats, or you want to kind of pitch these things, or you want someone to come in and give a talk or inspire your CEO or exec team or your board, even if you go do the work, we could come help set the groundwork for you and help change those paradigms. So if we can be a resource in any way, I'm committed. Whether Pilot helps you do the work or you do it yourself, it doesn't matter. Our vision is that everyone feels powerful at work, and there's no way that Pilot can do all of that. So we need many people in on this fight.
Awesome. And I will include all of the resources, links that Ben just mentioned in the show notes, so you can find those there, make it very easy for you to find him. Ben, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
A great start to my morning.
And thank you for listening and being here. I hope you can take back some of the insights and tips and sort of inspiration that Ben shared with us in our conversation today. Take it back, use it, make your work experience better, make your workplace better, go make a difference. And please remember to check in with those people that matter most to you. Might be the most important thing that you can do today. Till next time.